How did you want me to document things? I mean, I know I had that, sheet you gave me. How did you
Okay.
Is it some example every time I read it?
Are we ready to begin?
He needs to.
That's what I thought. I wasn't sure.
We're all good? You okay down there?
Well, Hannah.
Perfectly.
I offered to help, but she had her
Well,
system.
you'll get the idea, because you know patterns. So you
Before we begin, Paula couldn't be here today, but she wanted me to remind you guys that she had a book on patterns, and she checked it out of the library, and she's going to come and do read-alouds in the room, so if you wanted to connect literature to math.
Oh, very cool.
So just so you know, she has it and is willing to come in and read for something different.
Yeah.
Okay. Last we left off, we have to finish up with our concept sequence,
Right, we want to,
and then we're
Take a little
good
bite of
to go with our framing.
okay, we'll review any of this stuff? We know where we are?
I think we know where we are.
Yeah, I think we know where we are. Okay.
Oh, there was one thing in our vocabulary. Do we have pattern unit?
Oh, pattern unit?
We have unit.
The word
okay.
unit.
Do you want to say pattern unit?
Max uses pattern unit, but I don't know if that.
The same thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Just so we have it. Okay. All right, so concept sequence?
Let's say counting by fives, tens, or it says.
What?
Go back and forth. Twos is not that one. The other one is like- Twos
Count,
is missing.
oh, twos, 5 to
Yeah,
10?
twos is missing.
Okay. Okay, that works? Okay.
Cool beans.
All righty, that's an easy one. All right,
So where do we want to start with teaching this?
Well, I thought when Sonia and I were looking up in the math workstations in the Debbie Diller, pages 1 through 6, it was saying literally how to introduce patterns.
Yeah.
And they were saying that to start with, in your environment, picking out patterns, like even in the classroom, then going to using maybe the students, even
Yeah.
like a gender pattern, then going to letters, and then words and books, and then numbers, dominoes, equations. And basically what they were saying was that it's kind of like we were saying kind of like an anchor chart, but on page 4 they were saying you basically want them to make a pattern, draw the same pattern, label the pattern, and then write what the pattern is. So that's what the goal of when you're introducing the patterns.
What type of patterns were they talking about?
Like I said,
repeating or growing?
A, B, A, B, A, B.
So repeating.
repeating patterns,
Not
yeah,
growing
repeating.
patterns, but.
So do we want to start with repeating patterns?
I think
I think so, because it's easier for them to grab
Well, and
and
they've also been
understand.
introduced to it since kindergarten,
Right.
so.
And that has to be solid before you can even move on to
The growing one.
good growing
Get the
ones.
concept down.
I thought that we were
I'm
going to
just gonna
start
type
with the counting first. I don't know why I thought.
The counting
The
patterns?
numbers, to the skip counting
Math
first.
next starts with skip counting, the
I thought that was
introduction,
simpler. Twos, fives,
and then
It depends on how you guys want to start.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with the skip counting? Have you been working on that? I guess the better
'Cause that's
question
what
is,
I was-
have you already been working on it and you can springboard off of that?
That I was thinking of seeing what they know. How far do they know to count by twos? By five. That's what
I remember
Yeah.
last year when we were doing skip counting, because it came, Beth and I had a big aha moment, is having the kids being able to rote say the numbers and actually connect those numbers with objects, because it freaked me out, because I was watching a kid skip count by twos, and he grabbed one thing and went 2, 4, one object at a time, and that just, rote being able to say it, but actually being able to apply it were two different things, and that freaked me out.
So that's why I was
last year.
thinking if we do patterns, because it's not that we want to connect the skip counting to patterns. So that's why I thought if we started with patterns, and then when we get to the point when we start introducing numbers and
Growing.
equations, then that's how we're introducing the skip counting.
And
Because
skip
like I said,
counting
if
is
you,
really growing by twos.
Right.
That's a generalization.
so it's
growing
not
by
just that
5 and
rote
10s.
memorization of
Right.
it.
And I think the big point is that quantity piece, which
Yeah.
many people forget.
Matches.
And I think that's like the aha, like they'll probably be able to figure it out, hopefully themselves, after seeing the patterns using different, things in the
Manipulators
classroom and
and- yeah.
objects. And then they'll hopefully be able to, then really see, well, yeah, numbers are the
Apply it.
patterns.
So Beth, I hear in your concept sequence, you're saying connect to real life first, on real, concrete patterns, searching and finding patterns even before we go into a review of repeating patterns.
Well, just to throw another option out here, Kathy Richardson started with like sounds. I think Math Investigation did that, where you clap, snap, and then they repeat it. So that's another option. And then she also used their bodies, like one student would be sitting, one student would put their hands up, sitting, hands up, and then they would identify the pattern that way.
And one of the.
Well, and that goes back to what we talked about last time with the whole total body movement, getting kids up, moving with patterns.
And one of the lesson plans of the ESS is about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Stand up, high five.
To help with the physical part, so I was just trying to I thought a great way would be to make connections to not only objects but things. So I used this when we were doing probability. We used a lot of the different characters and we made likely, unlikely, based on different images. So then you can create A/B patterns with them, have the kids stand up, and then try to identify it. So this would be an A/B pattern, you could use those. And then when we get to growing patterns, there's some images that I put in that you could just show, okay, what do there's a growing pattern, with the 3. And they get very engaged. I found, when we used it for probability, they got very excited and they wanted to do more. And this is, something that they know, so they'll hone in on the differences of them. So those images are in the resources folder.
That's what I like about the Debbie Diller book is,
Yeah.
like I said, pages 1 through 6, she's really just teaching about patterns. And she has the children stand up and she arranges them in a certain way. She doesn't tell them it's a pattern, but she asks, what do you notice? And the kids finally go, oh, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. And they, oh, that's a pattern. So
Yeah.
it's not telling them it's a pattern, but
Right.
letting them explore. The exploratory is a pattern. I'm just putting these words that people are saying and we can cut and paste them around.
Maybe searching and finding repeating patterns, next to that on that same line, exploring patterns
Searching,
in our
finding, exploring.
real world. Yeah.
Searching, finding, searching for. Finding and exploring. Like clothes and things like that. A lot of the kids wear stripes and those have patterns in it.
yeah, they said the same thing in here.
I just want to keep in mind, you guys, so that we don't spend a long time on that, but they've been doing this since kindergarten.
So it's really
And they've been
review.
doing those things since kindergarten. So that would be more of our review
Right,
days, just to keep that in mind.
right.
I mean, I see the first 3 lines all being one day,
Right.
one lesson,
Yeah.
all 3 of those pieces.
And then it goes from in here. It goes from doing the clap snap to then they do a clap snap pattern and then they have to build the pattern with cubes. So then they're making it. So then they hear it. She'll clap twice and then snap, and so they would know 2 blue, 1 red, and make the pattern from the sounds they hear.
That's also kind of like what you can do with the pictures. You can have them show the pictures.
From the sound. Or,
And I
Boy, girl,
had
boy,
arranged them
girl.
in front of the class, kind of like what you're talking about, having them do different things. It was the same thing, except they were in the front of the class with the images and rearranging themselves, different situations.
Okay, so what do we want to do? Are we confident, are we comfortable more with that piece right there?
Yes.
yes. And then after, just going in the sequence of Kathy Richardson, after she had them build it from the sounds, then she gave them like a task card that had a repeating pattern, and they had to create the same pattern using different manipulatives.
So that would go back to that multiple representations
Yes.
of the same one.
pattern.
So like if you had Mario Princess Princess, then they could do like standing up, sit down, like it's the same pattern just shown in a different way. And they had really good examples on page 100 out of Kathy Richardson of the same pattern, different ways.
That's the students' examples.
I think one thing I'm hearing with what Mitzi's saying with that, this is like that repeating patterns that we're doing basically, is then going then from that repeating patterns to your skip counting, Mitzi, because that's a beautiful way then to show, it's a pattern, but it's a growing pattern. Might be something, just thinking, I don't know, so something in my head.
So
I
repeating
was saying the
growing.
same thing, that skip counting would lead into growing patterns.
Yeah, because it's then showing how skip counting is really a pattern, but it's just, and they're so comfortable with that. Is that then say,
Could, we had talked about like quick checks. I was wondering, could we give like a quick check for the repeating patterns?
pattern.
Because I think I read it somewhere also that has to be completely
Solid, yeah.
before you can do growing, and
That
just
makes
to make
sense.
sure they're really understanding.
Well, it's almost like you could do two quick checks. You could do a quick check for repeating patterns to see if they can build them and do them, and then a quick check for repeating patterns to see if they can take
Match
the
it.
same pattern
and,
and create it different
Right.
ways, because those are two different skills.
right,
Yes.
So
right, that makes sense.
it's almost like you need.
Are those both review from first and kindergarten? Could they be on
Well,
the
in
same?
kindergarten, they start talking about creating how patterns are similar. So they start talking about that. And they build upon it in first grade.
Okay.
The concreteness of that kids might have,
Yeah.
that's probably the tricky part. So that's why I'm saying you might want to do two separate quick checks. Because you also have the extending of the pattern, the repeating pattern. So if you did the quick check to see if they could build a pattern, extend the pattern, whatever else to that, then you do another one just on the specific skill of creating the same pattern using different things. Because that would probably be a harder concept.
Yeah.
So who can help create those two quick checks?
Well, there's Math
for
Connects
something.
has sheets that go along with those. Because-
As a
So
pre-assessment.
which ones do we want? The
Do we want to include those up in the assessment box and we can just make a note?
And which ones?
Quick check.
They need
There you
it.
go.
do we want to
Right there,
do
in the formative.
extending first? Or
I would
Isn't
say
that
creating first and then
pre-assessment?
extending.
Yeah.
I think you could do creating and extending together.
okay, there's one on page 69 of Math Connects, chapter 2.
So, yeah, creating and extending a repeating pattern, and then an assessment on creating a repeating pattern in a different manifestation, whatever the word they use.
That's spelled wrong. That's spelled right.
And that was page 69, you said?
Yeah, that one's with skip
Says
counting.
extend skip
so-
counting.
Perfect.
What about a pre-assessment before we start? Giving them maybe a simple A-B pattern that they did in first grade and seeing if we put a box in a circle.
Isn't that what we're,
Oh, I thought this was formative.
Is this
in
midway through or from the
Yeah, this
beginning?
was
Like a
after a little bit.
Yeah,
Check.
but
So do
just
we-
to see if even in first grade, they have the concept of the A-B pattern. Just a simple.
What do you guys think about that?
but couldn't that be done while we're doing, when we're doing these patterns, even connecting it with clapping and stuff like that? I mean, couldn't you do a
seeing if
visual?
they-
Yeah.
See if they can
Yeah.
make it, they can,
Like a formative.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's page 69. This is what I see.
What,
I think it's this.
and what was the other one, Brooke, that you were saying, the pattern? What was that?
Oh,
Extend,
it is a chapter.
recreating a pattern?
Multiple manifestations.
Multiple manifestations of the same pattern, okay.
No.
Multiple manis.
What's on page 69? Unless I have the wrong book or something.
Which chapter, book,
No, I'm
which
sorry.
number?
Chapter 2.
Chapter
Chapter 2.
That's with
Math
skip
Connects.
counting.
This chapter?
That's the one that they
Chapter
have
two.
for
Page 69.
extending.
This was keep coming.
Extend.
It's not a repeating.
It's not one.
Well,
You have
We need to make our own.
numbers. You have not been using. 2 snails
I
on
think,
each
I
rock.
think
How
what
many
we just
total
need to
snails are
decide
there?
is
No.
whoever is creating it could base something off of it, giving them ideas, but I think it'd be better just
To make our own.
to make your own and
Yes.
just say, this person will create it and present it, and we can tweak it,
If
like
they
we did
use-
before with the
If you're
reviews.
looking for big patterns in the
Okay.
resource
yeah.
masters, there are a lot of them
That's basically this.
at the end of the chapter.
There you go.
The one on page 69 would not
So
match
we just
what
need
we're
someone
doing.
to,
Yeah, we just
Do you
need
wanna
someone
check
to
that?
do
Put
it.
it in.
do you
Sounds
wanna
like
do that?
Carlos is the man.
Carlos.
Yeah.
Carlos.
Okay. Yeah,
You
Carlos.
could take a few of them, Carlos,
Yeah.
and put them together. If you need help, Carlos, I'll help
No
you.
problem.
Just pictures.
Okay.
Okay, so we need to go down sequencing.
Yeah.
So
Concept.
let's finish up with the sequence. then.
Are you keeping that page 69?
I'll take it out.
Yes, because it doesn't.
Why don't we
match.
just put resource,
Okay.
Math
It's a
Connect
natural
resource pages.
Right.
Okay, how about that?
But you need to get rid of the 69.
Yeah,
No.
Resource page.
Oh.
the resource
Yeah.
page
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
3.
Resources. I'm just leave that. It's
Sure.
You know that, Carlos, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
that's what it's suggested.
So what do we want, the next thing we want to go into is the skip counting.
And then do we want to connect that with a hundreds chart?
No, I wouldn't connect it with that
The
chart
skip
yet.
count.
Not yet?
Because there's 2 different things we're talking about there. One's counting the pattern and the other's like on a hundreds chart. I'm
That's
thinking.
identifying a pattern on the hundreds chart.
I know.
If you're connecting it to growing patterns, this is just my thought. If you use the hundreds chart, you can show how it's growing by 2. And we're adding 2 on. And then you can connect it with the manipulative also, so you're getting that quantity piece. So they have, you say 2, so they have 2 manipulatives, you find 2 on the hundreds chart. Well, what do we do if we wanted to skip to 4? We have to add 2
2.
on, so it's like a growing pattern.
Yeah.
So you're
That's what I think
connecting
we should
all
do.
3.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's what the investigations lessons, I don't know, I didn't mind them that much. How many floors, because that's what they recommend, section
1.2,
1.2.
it's on page
But I haven't started it
41.
at 1.1.
So
Because they jumped all the way to using the table.
Yeah.
But here, what they do is like 2 cubes, and if you add 2 more, that gives you 4, 2 more.
and then just connect it
So
with the
it's
hundreds
cute.
chart,
Yes.
so you're doing all 3.
And then it moves to the table that's on the math test, where they say using tables. It moves to the table, the
I think
next
that's
lesson
a big jump.
moves to the table that's on the math test. But you wouldn't have to go so quickly.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
could spend more time practicing.
So I guess the question on the table is, when we talk about skip counting and patterns with growing, do we want to connect it with the manipulative and the hundreds chart? Or do we want to just connect it to one, or do we want to connect?
both.
Connect both.
Yeah, cubes and hundreds
Yeah.
charts.
Yeah.
You're right, with the hundreds chart, definitely.
I would
Maybe
just
in the
put
next
it next
lines.
to it. Put skip counting connected to hundreds chart and cubes. And then where would you want to move after skip counting is the next thing. So you're already starting to introduce growing. Do we want to move to charts, or do you want to move to actual growing patterns?
I would say growing
I think
patterns
the
first.
patterns would be better. than
That would be the
the-
question you want to ask, because if you're saying investigation's making a huge jump, then we can add other pieces in before the whole tables and charts.
Because they have to know what it is in order to apply it to a
the-
table.
Yeah,
Growing, 3, 6, 9. I moved to the 3 one, it's growing.
yeah, it's a growing, but it's still, the chart's just so hard. I think if they need more manipulatives, there is that quote in that book that I really like.
So, I mean, that's the thought that you guys need to decide, where do you want to go to next? do you want to go to growing using manipulatives or growing using a chart?
Manipulatives.
Yeah,
I
I
think-
agree.
I mean, and if you look at our Rita Can-Dos, those concrete objects is like a level 1 skill. So if we want to get everybody on the same page, you know, it's better to use the concrete before we go into the
Debbie, yeah.
numbers. Just like the Debbie Dillard.
And Debbie Dillard is saying, if they have the opportunity to work with the counters or visual models that show the patterns, before they look for patterns and facts written in vertical form, it's easier to see them and construct that generalization. So they really need to see the concrete, the visual stuff before they can do it. So they need a lot of that modeling with the cubes before we move into the abstract tables and floors and missing things.
Isn't that what we have, though, skip counting with the cubes and the 100 charts? Isn't that?
But then after that, then what do we do?
We're using the manipulatives,
Right.
which is the cubes, and then the 100 charts. So then
What's
that's,
next?
But I think but then that
That could
growing
be
patterns
equations.
is the, growing patterns would be both the increasing patterns and decreasing patterns too. We have to figure out
well,
when we're gonna
since
do
we're
that.
doing the skip counting, that's showing them and then maybe extending a growing pattern. That's what they have next year, after they recognizing it, being able to extend a growing pattern.
So this one, so here, change that to extending a growing pattern? Yes, no?
Yes.
Okay.
That's just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Here.
And then like you said, where are we gonna put that?
But we also have
So
to
you
show
just
that
give it, and then they have to.
patterns, we have to
figure
show
out
that the
pattern.
growing patterns decrease and increase.
Put that next.
Yeah.
Or next to extending growing patterns.
And then decrease, how, decreasing patterns, growing patterns too?
Maybe
Yeah,
first
they're
just
called growing
recognize the increasing and decreasing before they extend it. I think, so that they see what it is.
Now, how would you guys want to do that with manipulatives and pictures and numbers?
Everything goes with.
Then I think we should put that next to it in parentheses so we remember.
Do we want to show them numbers and pictures and the manipulatives for all of these all at once? Or are we going to wait to do numbers like later? What do you
should
guys
all at
think?
once.
All at once, okay.
Using manipulatives, right?
Pictures with
And numbers.
growing pattern.
And numbers.
For growing.
And then,
So it would be like one rabbit, two
Like
dogs,
what-
one
what-
rabbit, three dogs.
Like what
I
Kim Maria was
I
showing.
just
Yeah.
remembered.
And I have like some, because we're talking about the various manifestations, so they're looking at it in numbers, they're looking at it in visuals and concrete objects, and then, you know, I had talked about in the last meeting about like those language arts connections. So, when we're ready for that, we can talk about, I have some examples, some texts that they're familiar with, that you can clearly see the growing patterns or the increasing. So,
We want to think about that, I go
Yeah.
back to the
later,
skip
now or
counting.
later?
Maybe connecting it in the concept sequence
So-
after extending, maybe before extending growing patterns?
What?
Connecting to
Show
literature?
us what you're talking about.
To the literature. Can I show one now?
Yeah.
Okay, so then what I thought of is we could take it into language arts or start off with one, but there's a book, for example, a lot of them know there was an old lady who swallowed a fly. So then this would be a repeating pattern. So there was an old lady that swallowed a fly, there was an old lady that swallowed a spider, you know, so through the text, as you're reading it and you're building the chart, they can see that this is a repeating text, and they could orally also say it with you, so you can link to that, because it's taking it in different ways, you know, so I think that
Sorry, I was going to say, there's a really good ESL game that I've played many times with kids. Like, I would start with, I have an apple. Then Beth would have to say, I have an apple, and then I have a baseball.
Oh, yeah.
And then she has to say, I
Going
have an
on a
apple, a
picnic.
baseball, and a cat. And
I'm
he
gonna
and
bring-
keep adding. The last person always has the hardest one.
Yeah.
They have to do them all. So that's another oral repeating growing pattern, too.
And I just have one other. I mean, there's so many texts, like there's a runaway gingerbread man, but this is one that we got in at the library. It's called It's by Mo Willems, and it's like, that is not a good idea. And you know this book, right? Wouldn't it be perfect?
It's a cute book.
So that it's about this wolf, and he's trying to get, or, you know, there's a bunch, it's kind of hard to put it concisely, but he's inviting this duck to go for a stroll, you know, and then these baby chicks say to him, you know, he asked him, would you like to go for a stroll? And then they say, sure, that is not a good idea, one of the chicks say. And then it goes on, like he asked him to go for a stroll in the woods, he asked him to go to his kitchen, you know, so you have all of that. So I just created something to tie in with that text that you could kind of see with the kids if they're orally saying it. You know, the first part is, that is not a good idea to the kids. And then the next page when it says, that is really not a good idea to go into the deep dark woods. You know, that is really, really not a good idea to go into the kitchen, you know. That is really, really, really not a good idea to help make the soup, you know. And then that is really, really, really not a good idea to, you know, go in the pot or something like that. And then it has a surprise ending. But I just thought as it unravels, you can see that growing pattern, which is why I made the really, really. And I put it in the resources folder as a PowerPoint so that you could, if you just wanted to use it on the smartboard as you're reading. It's just another manifestation that we could tie into our language arts space.
How about if we put at the top, just all the way at the top, integrate literature as many ways as we can. So that we're constantly keeping that in mind.
Oh, shoot.
And so, Anna Maria, I heard you say two different things, the growing, or the pattern of the text, but also earlier you had talked about making predictions. Making predictions and patterns related to math, making predictions and patterns relating to literature.
Exactly.
All right.
So where would we like to go next?
I would say, yeah. No, you talk about it. You pull it out. Math connects numeric patterns.
Right, I like how this sets up better than, I mean, maybe we can do a combination with the math, what is this again? Investigations, but on page 87, they're talking about numerical patterns, and then it goes into extending the numerical patterns, but I like how they have some nice sentence stems, and they're connecting the manipulatives with applying it into a pattern, but the way they set it up is nice. So they're using it, they're seeing it visually, and then, but they're also connecting it with the patterns. But I like how it's set up more so than the house and the levels.
This is a chart that they'll see.
It's a chart, it's a chart.
You're talking about page 87.
Because it says, you know, they're given a chart and it says, how are the numbers changing? And then your answer would be by tens. And then number pattern is counting on by tens.
It's almost like this is a step for that.
Yeah.
So it would be that first and then this,
Yes.
but you have to keep in mind that's how it's on the 10.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think this is,
But this is building that piece
Building,
when we
right.
were talking about, well, what is the 10th spot?
yes.
Right.
This page is kind of building that because they're figuring out what the rule
What the
is
rule is.
first.
The
So
unit.
the rule is it's counting by 10.
Yeah,
And then the 10th spot would be 10
Right.
more.
yeah.
Right.
Makes sense.
So it's, yeah, it's page
makes sense.
87.
87 through 90.
That's really going to be when we start actually framing and putting it in to remember that too.
Okay.
So numeric patterns using charts, or?
Or the 10th would be-
One thing I just want to, just to keep in our minds, going back to geometric patterns for a minute, going back to the standards where it talks about that in geometric patterns, students must often recognize transformations of a figure.
Oh, that they
And
move
so that they move in order to be able to, that's a higher level
thinking,
spatial
right?
There.
awareness. Is to be able to recognize the pattern, knowing that the geometric figures may have rotated around a particular vertex.
Oh, boy.
Is also part of the standard, so we need to make sure that we are incorporating that.
Yeah,
That is a higher order thinking skill.
This one says,
Anna Maria's materials will be helpful in that respect, if you could have the kids act them out, holding the in different positions.
Yeah.
You go to the drawing, go to page 92, it's a nice problem. there, the problems.
Forgotten.
That's
So
tricky.
I'm thinking also need a bracelet with 7 beads. At a heart, 2 stars, and a close.
I just threw it there. Y'all can change it, but it's just so I wouldn't forget.
And then I guess the last part would be them creating their own patterns.
Right.
Creating creating a repeating pattern.
Creating both. They
Yeah.
have to be able to create both.
Yep. We have, oh,
Well, no, it'd be at the very bottom,
Yeah, that's what I
at the
thought.
very end of the sequence.
create both.
Well, I could see what Sonia was saying. She was saying put creating repeating patterns there.
Right.
And then after we're done growing, creating growing patterns. And then maybe the next step would be creating, repeating,
Right.
and growing. Was that where you were going with
That's
that?
exactly
Sonia?
where I was going.
And also being able to identify the
The
difference
difference.
between the two. We've got to be specific about that instruction.
Create repeating patterns.
I think those sentence frames are gonna really be helpful because I often find they're like lacking the words, you know, so we already developed some.
And that's what happened on this test that we're doing now, where they're asked to circle one, the question that had the triangle and this rectangle, and they're to choose one and tell some things they know about it. So now they have to go writing. They had to, it was a struggle today, having them to write those
Right.
sentences, because it says, write sentences that you know about this shape. And the other one, how do you know that a shape is symmetrical? They had to write a sentence to tell, so it moved from just
And we
numbers.
were hoping that our sentence stems helped with that, to at least give them something to springboard off of that.
Right.
It reminds me of the graphs, with our horizontal and our vertical graphs, and how we've had all these problems with the graph. The same thing is always that comparing between the two things.
That is part of the standard. They should be able to describe it also. So
Yes, talk about
they
So with the
should,
geometry, should we also integrate, as a reminder, but to integrate geometry?
Oh, I did it. Geometric
Geometric
shape
figures, okay.
transformation, right there, repeating patterns using geometric shape transformations.
I think that's something we need to spend, as you said, talking about it, because that's what happened I go back to telling why the shape is symmetrical. Writing it in a sentence, saying it was, and
So we need to
have
make sure we add an
We are-
extra practice to that.
where they're saying it and writing it.
So, yeah, so the anchor charts are gonna be,
You know.
I made an anchor chart for the cognates, that I can put in, I'll take a picture of, because I think it's going to be creative, and then put it in the folder, but just using, like we did with the geometric figures, you know, so English to Spanish, so difference, diferencia, repeat, repetir, you know, and we can add to it, but you don't want to overwhelm as you go. But there are a lot of numero, you know, figure figuras, so, I mean, that's going to help with what we're talking about here, is just the sentence
Are we gonna
frames
start
and the
framing?
cognates.
Let's start framing.
Are we good with the concept sequence?
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you,
so
Andrea.
what day is this thing where?
Are you storing those in a one particular place, or are
I
they
put
put
them
in the units?
These resources, you
We just
can
need to
find
ask
it
when
within
everyone's
the
gonna finish
unit
their
guide
test.
under,
Okay.
I created a resources
finished.
folder.
Thursday.
But I'll take a picture of
So we're
this
starting
one.
Friday?
I want
Yeah,
to steal
Friday's
them
the
for
time.
to
first
draw
grade.
Didn't we say
Oh,
Thursday,
sure.
everybody's finishing
Yeah,
their
that's-
tests?
Yeah.
Was that the day that you guys picked, was Thursday, that everybody was finishing their tests?
So the unit will start Friday.
Is
You mean
everybody?
this Unit 4 test?
Yeah.
Finish it? Oh,
Thursday.
I gave it today,
so did I.
yeah.
So well, we have
Will
to,
be-
are we in agreement to start on Thursday or Friday? Which one?
Friday. I'd like to go over on Thursday, talk about it.
Go over
I'd
the
like to
test.
talk
And I
about
think
the
there's
test
WIDA
on-
test on Wednesday and
That's
Thursday.
why I
That's why we
gave
did
it
it
today.
Friday.
Have whole group we did test starting again.
Yeah, so Friday, it sounds
Because
good.
we're really behind.
Before we begin, can we talk about our spiral review? From our last test, unit test we took, we said that for the spiral review, we wanted to do subtraction.
Right.
Do we still want to start off with our spiral review being subtraction? Subtraction problems, do we still want to do that?
I
Yeah.
would say it wouldn't be a bad idea, certainly.
And
Why didn't we
connecting
talk-
subtraction with near doubles and doubles?
Yeah.
What are we,
Yes,
with
put that
AMC,
in
we were
there,
talking about
definitely.
place value. What were we talking about yesterday?
What with
During
our
AMC
AMC?
meeting.
We had the-
We were talking about,
The assessment.
the AMC, we said
But how we're gonna
how they
move-
were using their doubles and near doubles.
But we're
so-
gonna talk about using like, oh, I forgot now. should write it down. Never mind. Brain fart.
Other review from this test, maybe have them write a sentence practicing their writing, like put
Yeah.
a shape on the board and say, write what you know about this shape.
Or more, you know,
Because that was hard.
could be specific questions as to,
I think that's
you know,
for
corners,
sentences.
sides,
Yes, like
Texas faces or something.
Complete
A
sentences.
complete, I think that's the key word, complete sentence. And we might even want to say use sentence stems from previous unit that we had.
We need to spend on grading of that test. It's going to be so.
And even with like the subtraction, we can also look at it in like the word problem form, because they've been practicing
Yeah, I was going to say
subtraction.
that is more, not so much just giving them problems, but even like the table that you created.
The 4-step plan.
Yeah, doing that again, so it's combining, once again, reading a table, reading a problem, and then having to, and then we were doing, they weren't just doing two like, they weren't just doing 3 plus 2, it was 3 digits that they were adding together. So I think, you know,
I think that that's a lot for review, so we need to, you need to say maybe do 2 at a time, because if you're going to do a word problem, you want it to be a good juicy word problem that you guys can discuss.
Okay.
And that might take your whole review time right there. So I would say to either do a few quick subtraction problems dealing with near doubles and the sentence fraction, or do a good word problem so that you can really discuss how to solve it.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what would be our instructional goal for the first day? Because our objective is 2.2, sorry.
Thank you.
2.20,
Recognize.
sorry.
Are we going to give a pre-assessment of any kind?
I think it's going to be like
We said it was
informal.
going to be formative.
Informal,
with the
yeah.
First activity
Okay.
with the manipulatives, and that it would be a
Maybe
formative.
recognize a repeating pattern.
Recognize.
Right.
Just recognize a repeating pattern using sounds and physical.
Yeah.
Recognize
Oops, we're almost out of time, or we're out?
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
3 minutes. So when will you come back together to continue framing this unit?
You want to do it tomorrow like we normally,
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
you want to do
Tomorrow.
that?
Yeah, we'll do it.
Because you guys don't have your meeting tomorrow,
Yes.
so.
Using sound and physical manifestations, our new word that we love.
I have to say patterns.
And I
It'd also be a good connection if you talk to Jane and see what Jane is doing with them in music, to connect with what she's doing.
Art
with
too.
her. And art too, yeah.
Yeah.
But it sounds like tomorrow, it should be pretty simple because you all have good ideas from the books, the resources.
You're pretty
so it
much
should be
plugging,
pretty
yeah.
Simple to plug in.
Plus, we got the calendar here, too.
And
So
when do you-
when we come back next,
Thursday.
we'll have this
Framed
all
out.
framed out.
We have framed out, yes.
Okay,
And
that's
then
the
do you
goal.
want to do the data next Thursday
On the test.
for the
Yeah.
test?
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Right. I will. Trust me, I'm going to get it in there.
I was at work.